Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down the complete tier list for patch 10.2. This was a relatively light patch. There's only, I think, 10 champion changes in this patch, so not too many changes on the tier list. I think Riot decided to go light on this patch because pro scene is starting up for all regions in the next little while here, so they probably want to wait to see what the meta is like for pro before they start nerfing and buffing a whole ton of champions. But nevertheless, a couple different changes in this patch which we'll be going over in this video. So if we start things off here up in the top lane, Set is going to be making an appearance on the tier list. He's going to be placed in A tier right now, and I do think overall he's probably one of the most balanced release champions we've seen in quite some time. It seems like almost every single release champion recently has needed some sort of huge nerf or huge buff after the release, but I really feel like Set probably only needs a couple of different tweaks and he's going to be in a good spot. So if you do want to pick him up right now, I think it's a great time to do so. He is banned quite a bit, but if you can get him, if you know how to play him well, I do think he is one of the better carry top laners. Now, Mordekaiser is going to be dropping down into A tier. I did underestimate his nerfs a little bit in last patch. The nerfs did affect him a little bit more than I expected, so he is going to be dropping down into A tier now for this patch. In the S tier there, I'm going to be bumping up Shen and Cassiopeia. I think I underrated these champions last patch, Cassiopeia especially. If you can play a good Cassiopeia top lane, she just really doesn't have any bad matchups right now. She has a great early game, scales super well into the mid to late game, so I do think she is one of the premier carry top laners, even though she is still very underrated. And then Shen, I also did underrate him in last patch, so I'm going to be bumping him up into S tier. He's just so good for the current meta. Picks like Shen, Kled especially right now, if you can play them well, if you can win your lanes on these picks, then you can not only win your lane, but you can also win other lanes too. And I think that's what makes like a really good top laner at the moment. If you can just get a couple kills in the lane with Shen and then use a good ultimate down bot lane or use an ultimate down for like a dragon fight, that can just single-handedly win your team the game. Moving on to the jungle now, a couple different changes for this patch. Trundle did end up getting two different buffs, buff to his W move speed, also a buff to his E slow, so that's going to be enough in my opinion to move him from B tier up into A tier. I think in previous patches, he was actually a decent pick. Like, nobody's playing Trundle right now, but I don't think it's a terrible pick by any means, so with the buffs he did receive there, it's going to help out his ability to gank better in the early game, that extra movement speed to chase down his opponent, the extra slow on his E to help him close the gap is going to be really nice for when you're ganking with Trundle. And then Set is going to be placed in the B tier for jungle, so I do think top lane is Set's best role right now. You can still play him in the jungle though. I do think he's a pretty average jungle pick. He's nothing special though in my opinion. He doesn't have the best gank potential in the early game. He doesn't have that gap closer in his kit, so he kind of relies on his teammates to have some sort of crowd control they can use to assist him when he is ganking. He's got a decent clear, decent dueling potential in the early game, so if you want to play Set jungle, I don't think is a terrible pick, but I do still think there's better jungler options. And then one adjustment I'm making to the jungle list for this patch is moving Shyvana up into A tier. So I did underestimate her a little bit in last patch. I think that right now, especially for the lower elo, she is a very good jungle pick. Having the ability to solo out those dragons in the early game because of her passive, dealing that bonus damage to dragons just makes her a great pick for the meta right now. And after the buff she did receive in last patch, she got a buff to where she now actually does synergize with Cloud Dragon. It's going to stack her Fury up faster for her ultimate, so that's super good if you're playing AP Shyvana, especially if you're playing AP Shyvana and you can just secure yourself an early Cloud Dragon, or if it ends up being like a Cloud Soul, that's even more insane for Shyvana, because if you can get a couple Cloud Dragons on Shyvana, then you're pretty much gonna have permanent uptime on your ultimate. So like the top lane, whatever you were spamming in the jungle for last patch, it's going to stay relatively the same power level in 10.2. I was actually pretty surprised that no S tier junglers got nerfed in this patch, especially Echo and Elise. They're very strong jungle picks at the moment, and for the Echo there, he's been a great pick for like multiple patches in a row now, but like I said at the start of the video, it's probably because Riot wants to wait and see what ends up being picked in pro a lot. Whatever ends up being picked or banned a lot in pro, that's what's going to end up getting nerfed. And because Echo, if you remember back to Worlds, he was a really good pick in solo queue, but he wasn't being played at all in Worlds, so he might not even end up getting any nerfs at all in the coming patches. So moving on to the mid lane now, a few different mid laners ended up getting some changes in this patch. The ones to Ziggs were definitely the most influential in my opinion. So he's going to be moving from B tier up into A tier for 10.2. He ended up getting a damage buff to his Q, got increased by 40 at rank 5 in it. So that's a really nice buff to Ziggs. Lots of extra damage there coming out of your Q now once you do get it maxed out. His W satchel knockback also got increased from 400 range up to 500. And then the slow on his E got increased by, it looks like 10 at all ranks. So overall, really solid changes to Ziggs. They're not going to be enough in my opinion to jump him from B tier up into S tier or anything, but in this coming patch here in 10.2, if you're a Ziggs player, if you're thinking about picking him back up, now is probably going to be one of the better times to do so. And then two other mid laners that got changed in this patch. Victor got a buff in quotation marks to his mana per level, and that's not going to be enough to like bump him up into A tier or anything. He needs a little bit more of a buff than that to actually move him up on the tier list. For Kiana, she ended up getting a nerf to her W attack speed, so that's more so going to hurt Kiana in the jungle. Kiana jungle is basically going to be dead now for 10.2, but Kiana in the mid lane, I don't think it's going to affect her as much. Like, you're not as reliant on that attack speed from your W there to succeed on Kiana mid. So Kiana mid is going to remain an A tier pick for 10.2. So overall for 10.2 mid meta, you're still going to see assassins dominate for yet another patch. So you still got Fizz, you got Talon, Katarina, Kassadin, still extremely strong carry picks in the mid lane. Couple mid laners that got buffed in last patch, Corki, Azir, and Sylas. The buffs really didn't help them out at all. So if you're wondering like if you should consider picking up the champions after their buffs, like they're still pretty weak at the moment. So I'd be staying away from like just any of those C tier champions if you're looking to climb in solo queue. So if we move over to AD carry now, a couple different changes affect them for 10.2. Aphelios did get a bunch of direct nerfs in this patch, so those are going to be enough to drop him from S tier down into A tier. He also got some nerfs in previous patches too, which dropped him down a little bit. So after all of these nerfs combined, he's finally now going to be just dropping out of S tier. I still think he's going to be a pretty solid pick for 10.2. Like, you can still pick him up here and you can still have good success with him, but he's just not going to be as OP as in previous patches. I am going to be moving Senna up into S tier. A lot of other AD carries are getting hit with indirect nerfs. We're seeing Stormrazor getting a 5 AD decrease on it. We're seeing Cloak of Agility get a 5% decrease on its crit chance. So those changes affect most of the AD carries, but they don't affect Senna at all. Senna right now is doing really well with a Glacial Augment setup as an AD carry. She doesn't build a single crit item. You go for the mana immune, you go for the lethality item. So she isn't going to be affected at all here in 10.2. And for that reason, she is going to be one of the stronger AD carries now. Draven is getting a direct buff to his ultimate in this patch, and I just think he needs a little bit more in order for him to go from A tier up into S tier. He's a decent AD carry pick right now, but he's kind of just lost that identity as a strong lane bully champion. Like, there's other champions right now that can basically just do his job better, like Misfortune, really good lane bully, easier to play than Draven as well. You can pick Caitlyn, you can play Heimerdinger, so there's no real reason to pick Draven right now over a lot of other AD carries. Now, Caitlyn and Jhin will be affected the most in this patch because of the Stormrazor change and because of the Cloak of Agility changes, but they're not going to be affected as much as maybe you would think. If Stormrazor ends up just being too weak on the champions, which I don't think it will be, but if it does, they can just go for Infinity Edge Rush. They can go back to that build setup. They don't need Stormrazor in order to be strong champions. Like, Jhin still does really well with an IE Rush right now, same with Caitlyn, so they're still going to remain very strong picks here for 10.2. And then lastly, to round out the video for support, there's a couple different champions getting changed in this patch, but overall, the placing of the champions on the tier list is going to stay exactly the same as to where it was in 10.1. Nautilus is getting a Q damage nerf in this patch by 10 at rank 1, and then by 30 once you do get it maxed out. Now, 30 damage at max rank there, it is pretty substantial, but considering you actually don't max this ability out until last on Nautilus, or that's actually the best max order for him in 10.1 right now, I really don't think it's going to affect him too much. E max into W max second, and then Q last does best in 10.1 right now, so I assume that's now just going to be the #1 max order for 10.2 here, and because you're only losing 10 damage there at rank 1 on your Q, I don't think it's going to be enough to drop Nautilus out of S tier. Karma and Lulu are also getting buffed for this patch, so Karma is getting some damage increase on her Q and her W, but not enough in my opinion to jump her from A tier up into S tier. Lulu's also getting a couple small buffs to her armor, her base AD, E cooldown is being reduced by 2, so like Karma, just not enough of a buff in my opinion to bump those champions up into S tier, but nonetheless they do get a little bit stronger for this patch, so if you are Karma or Lulu players, they are going to be better here for 10.2. And then Sona's the final champion getting buffed in this patch. She also does get a relatively small buff to her E movement speed, so I just think that overall she's going to remain an A tier pick. Possibly, like, if any champion were to jump up into S tier out of the champions getting buffed in this patch, it probably would be Sona, but I still don't think it's going to be enough to bump her from A to S. So overall for support in 10.2, if you're looking for some freelo, definitely look to pick up Nami. She got some buffs in last patch and those changes were just kind of out of the blue for no reason. I feel like Nami was always a pretty good pick in solo queue for the previous patches, so don't know why she got buffed. That buff just kind of put her over the top, and if you can play a good Nami right now, she's one of the best, if not the best support for 10.2. If you still want to play that aggressive support down in the role, then picking up Leona or Blitzcrank or even Nautilus are still great picks for 10.2 as well, so you can have some great success on those champions if you can play aggressive in the early game and capitalize on your opportunities. Alright, so that is going to be all for the video, guys. Not a huge shift in the meta here for 10.2, but nonetheless, hopefully this video does help you out. Hopefully it does give you a pretty good idea of what you should be prioritizing for the coming patch. So with that being said, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.